Putin's back at it again, folks. Our Russian big brother is a man on a mission, and surprisingly, the target isn't Ukraine. At least not directly. Putin is out to make Russia great again with his plan to absorb their friendly neighbor, Belarus. Didn't know Putin was a fan of Cheetos. Whatever the case, this spells trouble for Belarus. In 2023, an official administrative document was leaked by a group of international journalists, which outlined the multi-pronged approach Russia intends to employ to bring Belarus under its wings to create a union state. This 17-page document served as Russia's guide to the sinister annexation of Belarus via the combination of military, political, economic, and social strategies that have already been put into action. You know what they say, Putin's not one to mess around. Today we'll be discussing the leaked documents, adding some historical context to the storyline, and going through each measure Russia has planned for their next-door neighbor. Background information. It's no secret Putin has dreamed of regaining historically Russian lands back to the nation. No, seriously, he didn't even try to hide his intentions. In July 2021, the man published a 6,000-word essay maintaining his belief that Ukrainians were really Russians, since they all came from the same roots and were one people. Jeez, did no one tell Putin you shouldn't say your wishes aloud or else they won't come true? Understandably, his denial of Ukraine's independence sparked international shock and hostility. Putin, being Putin, launched a full-scale war against Ukraine merely 7 months after this and has continued in his efforts of imperial conquest. This ideology behind the invasion of Ukraine is eerily like his goal of absorbing Belarus. But what does Belarus think about Russia's plans? Alexander Lukashenko's Belarus. Technically, both countries are already formally part of a union state, following an agreement in 1999. This agreement set the foundations for the future integration of the two countries. Alexander Lukashenko, the long-standing president of Belarus since 1994, chose to adopt friendly relations with his giant neighbor and has continually opted for a military and political alliance with Russia. Lukashenko benefited greatly from the deal in two ways. Belarus lacks natural resources but is abundant in industrial technology, hence Russia's giant mineral reserves were a godsend to the nation. Belarus's energy sector became highly dependent on cheap imports of oil and gas from their neighboring country, helping boost economic development exponentially. Secondly, Lukashenko directly benefited by borrowing Russia's power and throwing his weight around on Belarus's political stage. His autocratic policies are similar in many ways to those of Putin's, and he ensured he reigned supreme over the decades by cracking down on his political opponents mercilessly. Little did he know this was a double-edged sword. His actions caused backlash from the international community, with both the United States and the European Union refusing to recognize him as president of Belarus. This resulted in widespread international trade sanctions on Belarus, thus increasing its dependence on Russia, as it was the only ally around. Additionally, his suspiciously generous Russian backers had their own hidden agenda, eyeing his nation's military forces, geographic location, and GDP like a cat does its prey, with greed and hunger. Economic and political pressures. According to Russia's leaked game plan, there are three approaches to annexing Belarus. There's the short-term plan, or until 2022, the medium-term, or until 2025, and finally the long-term option, meaning 2030. Judging from the current political climate, Russia chose the long-term strategy. As they say, slow and steady wins the race. It all started with the Union State Plan drafted in 1996 to deepen the ties between Russia and Belarus. Belarus, attempting to protect their sovereignty and their independence, initially sidelined the plan due to the obvious advantages Russia gained over them. Time passed and Belarus faced crisis after crisis, most notably the refined oil price hikes from Russia. Given their international sanctions made trading with other countries next to impossible, Belarus was in a tough spot. The phrase "between a rock and a hard place" doesn't cut it when you're facing off against Putin. This allowed the Kremlin to take advantage of the situation and offer concessions in the oil prices, on the condition that Belarus made a few political concessions of its own. This let Russia get a foot in through the door and marked the start of its insidious takeover. The rebellion after Lukashenko's rigged 2020 elections in Belarus only cemented the Kremlin's position, as Russia lent support to him and helped him control the masses. The neighbors are now moving towards a political integration agreement by 2025, which stands in line with Putin's original annexation goals outlined in the leaked papers. Since then, Putin has increased his control over Minsk due to unpopular sentiment towards Lukashenko for his autocratic regime, like taking candy from a baby. Additionally, Putin plans to share a common currency within the new state union. And considering what we know about his nationalistic ideals and pride, it's unlikely he'll accept anything other than the Russian ruble. Military ramifications. Lukashenko realized that the Kremlin's assistance came at a staggering price, and in a turn of events, Belarus announced that they would closely cooperate with Russian forces in their war efforts against Ukraine. Although there was a condition: Ukraine must instigate by attacking first. Unfortunately, Lukashenko's faint opposition was overshadowed by his agreement to ally with Russia in this geopolitical deadlock. Since then, the ex-Soviet nation has reformed its territorial defense forces with Russia and participated in joint military exercises as a show of support. To increase his influence in Belarus, Putin stationed a staggering 10,000 troops to use the country as a base of reinforcements against Ukraine. Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, now faces a second threat from the battalions of tanks Moscow sent its way through Belarus. Of course, these are just measures to adequately respond, according to Belarus's Ministry of Defense. They stated that due to the current threats of escalation of violence at their shared borders, they need to set up a safety net of sorts, all because of the potential threat of Ukrainian troops stationed there. But if the game plan in the documents is to be believed, Putin plans to keep expanding their military presence in Belarus until it becomes sufficiently influential to force the Belarusian army to comply with Russian regulations. Social reform. This is a widespread strategy and a clever way of instilling respect for the Russian government. Leave it to Putin to brainwash people into revering Russia. The first stage of the strategy includes censoring Belarusian identity and restraining any Western influences. The Kremlin learnt his lesson from the disastrous attempts to coerce Ukraine over to join their proposed union. Puppet leaders can only do so much. To conquer a nation, one must conquer the hearts of its people. It would be such a romantic sentiment if not for the magnitude of the implications and the fact that Putin is always ready to play dirty. Ukraine's trade agreements with the European Union led Russia to gradually tighten the noose around Belarus, instead of attempting to smoother and subdue by force from the get-go. The intense Russification of Belarus also included creating a common currency and distributing Russian passports among Belarus as part of their second strategy. The third and last step would be to assimilate Belarusians into Russian identities by influencing the language, media, and educational institutions of the country. By tapping into the potential of Belarus's youth, Putin can ensure the loyalty of the masses, hence little to no opposition to his plans. Future implications. Surprisingly, Lukashenko has downplayed any Russian involvement in Belarus and oscillated between deflecting and denying the contents of the leaked document. If things work out as the Kremlin planned, then the new Russian Union will absorb Belarus eventually, with each sector of the country within its control. Now, what does this mean for Russia and the eventual NATO opposition to the formation of this union? Primarily, this would pose a direct threat to NATO's strategic interests in the same geopolitical climate. An increase in the Russian military and political power could potentially give rise to military aggression, which would go against NATO's primary objectives of providing peace and stability to its member nations. Moreover, NATO was formed on democratic principles, and an annexation of Belarus into Russia would oppose these ideals. This could lead to increased tensions. With that said, only time will tell what the future holds for this melting pot of dictators, imperial idealists, and pacifists. If you liked this video and want to know more than just a summary, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. We're sure you'll love the next video just as much as this one.